Thank you, Will. Thanks for having us and being here with us to have this conversation in this context. Feels like, yeah, just kind of a gift. It's not like often that we get to like figure out how to talk about fashion with folks who are, not in our industry or are adjacent or alongside. So that's a treat. So I wrote a book about fashion that's very critical because I think that's intellectually honest and bodily honest. And when I got to the end of that book, I felt like, wow, I don't know where I kind of didn't leave people much here, which is good, which was right. And as I started to think about like how I genuinely felt in relationship to fashion, which is actually that I feel like fashion is really abundant and important, I started to figure out that the way I wanted to talk about it was to say that we have industry, which has very much appropriated fashion, which is culture, which is a basic need, which is expression, which is all these other things that unfortunately have largely been put in service of profit. So that allowed me to then start thinking about, okay, well, so then where do I leave folks? Because I think that a lot of the solutions that we have now, and Bio talked about this yesterday a little bit, the sustainability solutions are mostly about like sustaining the industry. Or they are very, very genuine and important questions, but they're still tinkering around the edge because they don't address the fact that the industry is motivated by profit. And all the things that are in service of that really require us to treat people and all of creation as disposable. So what does imagination look like if the solutions that we are currently looking at feel like tinkering around the edge? As I was able to separate out culture from industry, I could begin to identify the places presently where fashion was blooming, where fashion was helping us survive profoundly. I'm going to give you a couple examples because I think it is important to actually name something that we don't talk about so often. So the first one that I encountered that transformed my understanding of fashion, which still has to do with industry, is, okay, this industry has been extractive for centuries. But inside that, people inside this industry have won us some of our most profound democratic freedoms, our most cherished labor rights, and that was all from people within this industry. The first labor union in the United States is the Lowell Mill Girls, it's teenage girls. The New Deal worker protections come out of garment worker organizing before and after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. I think it is not a big stretch to say our most precious democratic freedoms come from those enslaved on cotton plantations and their descendants. So people who have been inside this extremely oppressive extractive industry have built something really, really beautiful that has helped us survive. So as like I have been a model for 20 years and an organizer for 15 of those, and putting myself in that lineage suddenly helped me see, oh, we keep telling the story of fashion this one way, and it's actually erasing. That is actually making us disposable. We're not seeing people. The two other examples that I want to give that are not what necessarily I am part of, but what I see as profoundly important, and this is going to lead me to my first question for Camila, but I just came from London where I was in conversation with a friend of mine, Isaac Kairuki, who is a visual artist and also a ballroom dancer who is organizing House of Watermelon, which is ballroom dancers in solidarity or understanding that the political shelter that is ballroom, that is about ensuring the autonomy and self-determination for people in that scene, in that moment, necessarily aligned them with people in Palestine who were struggling to have autonomy and self-determination. And so this is also fashion, right? This ability when we have so little freedom, how these moments of fashion culture have been sites of expression and freedom and shelter. There are so many examples of that, so I'm not going to bore you with them. But the example of a model that will lead me to Camila is, I got obsessed in writing my book with a woman named Virginia Oldoini, who's the most photographed woman of the 19th century. Why was I obsessed? Great question. I didn't know. I had to think about it. Read everything that was ever written about her. And I realized the reason I was obsessed with her is because she paid to have these portraits taken. And I was like, why would I, if no one was paying me, why would I do this? And so something about her had the answer. And so my first question for Camila, whose photos are brilliant, and so I mean this in not a demeaning way, but in a way to provoke you to share what is most powerful, is what photos are worth taking and making.
Also, round of applause, Noah. Wow. That's a great question, actually. And I was asked earlier about photography and about the camera, and I think, you know, as photographers, we constantly have to try to question who are we to take this photo, because what we're doing is we're taking, we are grabbing something. It's a colonial practice to take photos. It could be, and so I think as a photographer, the only solution I always find is to make sure that that photo is taken with the person you're taking it. If you are making an agreement together, that you are trusting each other, that that photo is going somewhere, is gonna become a whole entity of its own, and is not mine, is not that person's. It's a whole new entity that goes into the world, and hopefully, and I live off of this hope, it opens that crack that we were talking about yesterday. Hopefully, it will crack something in our consciousness and our collective understanding of anything. And so I constantly question myself, and I constantly want to make sure that that photo is taken with that consent. And it's not only the consent of, yes, take my photo, is what, like, I'm trusting you with almost like my possibilities. And so that's the photos I think it's not even worth taking, they need to be taken. They need to be created. And so that's the type of photography that I aspire to continue to make, to be honest, yeah.
Okay, you said all the words that were that really were like a perfect lead up to my next question, and what I see in your work that is so powerful, which is that that you really do challenge that what you're saying is a colonial project, a capitalist project, that photos have a single author, or that we take something. The language around photography is so violent, right? Like, I'm going to shoot you. Intense. And I think that you really beautifully challenge that, and it's hard to figure out. At least I don't have the answer, so I'm curious about what tangibly do you do to make something a collaboration when everything is set up for you to be the author, for you to own the photo, for you to retain control, for the gallery or the buyer to approach you, for the magazine to land on your edit? How do you challenge that? What does it mean to co-author a photo?
Well, I wouldn't say I co-author. I think, like you say, everything is set up to constantly make this about one person. When and so what I try to do is to, first of all, understand that it's almost just like a strategy, that I am here in this body in service to like una legión, like hundreds of people. There's a really good song that I love. In Spanish says, ten cuidado que no estoy sola, conmigo vienen 100. Be careful, I'm not alone, with me come hundreds. And so I like take the space I'm constantly put into as that, as I'm like, yes, you come in, and then like I turn it back and like whoo, this room fills with everyone else that comes with me. So I constantly try to challenge that. You want to put me in the space. Well, it's gonna come with a lot of music and a lot of dancing and a lot of filling up the space with everyone I can possibly bring in.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the ways that I see you challenge that really beautifully is that in the moments where we have collaborated, unlike lots of other creative collaborations that I've been a part of, you, by and large, remain in deep, long-term relationship with the people you photograph. You don't take it lightly to photograph someone or for them to share that performance with you. So I see that as part of the kind of reciprocity of your work, is that there is not like a sort of subject. You really see that as a photograph person that you're in collaboration with.
Yeah. But also collaborating in a spiritual sense, because it's impossible to, become the best friend of every single human being you photograph, and I also need to come to terms with that. Mm-hmm. I was listening to an interview of one of my inspirations. We were talking yesterday about inspirations, and it's this Colombian artist called Doris Salcedo. Doris is an incredible sculpture and conceptual sculpture dealing with, in Colombia, with the armed conflict, and talks a lot about death and talks about all the victims in Colombia during the past war. And, the interviewer asks her about redemption and about, like, can you live with the idea that you cannot save everybody's life? You cannot heal actually what happened to them in whatever traumatizing condition, or in my case, dealing with all the humans I interact with, and I empathized with her because it's true. We cannot, as one person, heal the whole part and live with that. The part that we're doing is a lot already. Yeah. And it's an instant. I only offer an instant of us interacting, and I, Camila, need to understand that is already a lot. Yeah. But there's something within each of us, I think, that you just want to, like, peace in the world. Yeah, but I don't know if one can achieve that on your own, and then you arrive to this humbleness of understanding, and this is what I've been understanding this whole weekend is, we're a network of humans and of people doing it for one another, and I'm just one little part of this that then, with everyone else ends up weaving this network of this tsunami that is coming of all of us looking for the revolution. I'm really interested in the revolution.
And making the revolution irresistible, which you do a good job of. Okay, so I haven't spoken with a photographer in public since releasing my book, or about my book. And so I wanted to for folks who haven't read it, share a little bit of what it is, and then share a passage that I think was very challenging to write. And as someone who's also been like, a creative producer and put people in front of the camera, I find complicated to figure out when folks should be there and what happens when they are. So I want to ask you a hard question, but I'm going to lead it into it. With vulnerability and a story about this book, and then Okay. Sorry, just working out what I'm about to do. Okay, so I wrote a book where the word that made me want to write this book is this word tolerance, because I felt like the idea of consent in a world of very limited choices was not enough, that's a very low bar. And that also in my own experience of the fashion industry, I felt like I was tolerating a lot of things which made me complicit in harm and in my own harm. And I talk about that in in a whole host of ways, being tolerant of systems that rely on extractive labor, being tolerant of hierarchy and a value system that relies on racial capitalism and celebrates whiteness, and being part of a system that treats women as like largely disposable, and that I think even in celebrating them tries to reinforce that by saying your value is extremely shallow. And so talking about tolerating harm to myself and to others inside that system. And midway through the book, I felt like I wanted to write a passage that was like saying something that I felt really uncomfortable about as a writer, and also as parallel as a model. Because actually I thought writing and modeling were very similar experiences. They both are effective labor where you are trying to like elicit an emotional response from the audience. And so I wrote this passage, and the whole book is addressed informally to a you, and is the you an audience, or is the you, very early in the book, my mother? Is the you someone who is like, has the idea to dominate? So I wrote this passage that I'm going to read to you. Time passes quickly. Years pass and nothing happens. It is lonely. It's not just no language. Even our bodies can't speak. They are used only for what they can sell. What if I tell you this? Even now when I imagine us meeting to talk, if it was just us and nobody else knew, I always imagine myself naked. I would have exercised for weeks just knowing the meeting was coming. I'd shower and condition my hair, lotion from head to toe, put on a little concealer, a gentle application of shiny stick on the Cupid's bow and the lids and the corners of my eyes, a lick of waterproof mascara on the lashes. You come to me. I'm waiting in some Frank Lloyd Wright-style country house in late August, near a beach, maybe on stilts above a marsh or a dead-end road. Maybe I'd wear a worn cashmere sweater and bikini bottoms, relax to answer the door. We'd both know there was nothing underneath. The sun would already be low in the sky, and I'd offer you a drink, whiskey. Music would be on, but I'd want your playlist. For the same reason I'm naked, I want you to be at ease. I want you to fall in love with me, and then I want to speak. This passage, to me, had to do with what is required to be legible. What is required to make someone else comfortable so that you can say something challenging. And to play with my own complicity in the understanding of the voyeurism of fashion and photography and the performance of femininity. And something that challenges me when I try to make work in a fashion language. You know, in the lead up to the COP that ended up passing the first, the Paris Agreement, the first international climate accord, I helped organize a shoot where we photographed all the women who are leading going into that and put them in Vogue. And it was complicated because suddenly, okay, you have to pick 15 and all the others don't matter. Or we're going to have hair and makeup on set and we're going to dress you up in a certain way because then you're legible. And so I felt very complicated about what the requirements were and how complicit I was in speaking that language. And I see in your work, which is beautiful, which says, what happens if we adorn these people? What happens if I celebrate and make this individual in their most regal, their most incredible, like golden hour light, in their most sensual? And there is an element of, because the audience as voyeur can then have it will elicit some feeling of intimacy, of connection, of desire. And that is so complicated, right?
Yeah.
So how do you understand that, what you are putting together? I feel very complicated about those two things. I'm curious how you resolve them.
Okay.
And also, there is no resolution.
Wait, pero I got it.
Okay.
Espérate. Wait. I'm gonna go off a tangent and then come back.
Okay, great.
Yesterday, again, going back to the keynote speech, it wasn't a speech, it was an interview. We spoke about Elewa, Eshu, which is for Yoruba, the trickster, but also, unsure if in Nigeria as well, I know in Cuba, is the child, lives in the body of a little boy who is playful. And what Elegua does is this baby shows the path. And since yesterday, I've been thinking a lot about that and about children and how we can never underestimate how much of their imagination is leading us, and it's giving us it's giving us answers, and we adults feel so lost, but I feel children are magnificent because they do have a lot of the answers. And so that to say that my arrival to fashion was because I figured out that it was the closest space where I could reproduce what I used to do as a child, where I can play and dress up and imagine scenarios. I used to get dressed up with all of my friends and have a stage like this one and make my parents like watch me perform over and over again. And one day my dad fell asleep, poor thing.
Only once is a pretty good...
I know, poor thing, only once, and I'm talking about it. He did watch many. But, and so I think I started realizing that it was not just me who wants to enter a shoot and play. And then there's a bunch of adults with these visual imaginations, and we come together in a shoot, and we create, and we play. And there's never really an end to play unless there's commercial implications. So like, you have to put this or that brand because it's who's paying for this shoot or whatever. But aside, like if you don't look at that, I've come to figure out that is through playfulness that we find each other, because I'm talking to your little girl and my little girl are playing together, and we're creating a scenario that in some way seems like it's giving us some solutions. And I also like fashion because there is a sense of not needing to explain much, which I really like, and I'm really okay with not knowing why I wanted to put a chair on someone's head, or it's not a metaphor. It's actually, or a huge fish in the feet of an actress I admire, and because we're all in this, it's all true. Because we're playing, and because in that moment we've agreed that we're playing, yes. we are okay, and we don't need to give explanations, which I think is then what over-explaining certain visuals kills them. And so that's kind of like the hack I constantly go to. Like, let's play, let's go and let this lead the way. And I've noticed that when you do certain things with certain human beings in the camera, I think, I know now, I'm certain that it's showing some answers. Yeah. And we are, something we spoke about yesterday that I want us to dive into, that I'm sure is in your questions, is imagination. Yeah. And how, again, addressing yesterday's keynote, we don't have imagination as a collective. We've been imposed what to imagine. And I think our duty right now as image makers is to reclaim that imagination and reclaim what we can imagine as possible. And I have to sit in this chair and know that that's everything I can do, and that is enough. And then pass it on to lawmakers, into people who are diving in the oceans, or indigenous leaders who are protecting the earth. So I know that my chair, and this is what I add on to, and which is, let's reimagine. And it's all, and I think it's very poignant to children right now. And I think we need to just reconsciously protect children a lot.
Yeah. I love hearing you talk about play, because one of my questions was going to be, like, I think one of the most generative things about fashion is that it is like a site of often like nonverbal communication. And we're in a moment where it can be really hard to figure out what the words are. And fashion can be this incredible container for everything from grief, and I think of, like, in this particular moment, the power of the keffiyeh as a mantle of grief, but also a very powerful action when it's worn. We're all, like, very too familiar with the word martyr, and I think that's because we haven't been at a funeral. We have not been able to be in grief. It is like a call to action, and it is the wearing of that keffiyeh that's almost a reminder that it's not a funeral. This is a pattern. This is loud. This is recognizable. This is a history. So I think that fashion holds that, and that also that fashion holds play and pleasure and joy. And sometimes both at once, in the case of like House of Watermelon, right? Like the ability to hold both those things. And I was thinking about, like, what are this is like a question of, for you tangibly, and then I think the way that I want you to talk to people about, how do you build that trust with the person you're photographing without words? And really, like, what does that mean tangibly? And then in your kind of responsibility to them, maybe what all of us learn about our responsibility also as an audience, as it's a triangle, as a third person who is participating in that.
As you were speaking, I was reminded of this book called After the Party. I'll get back to you on the author, but is about the minoritarian performance, and that includes drag. And part of the book speaks about drag, and then it connects it to Nina Simone in a way, and her definition of freedom, which she used to say that only in stage and only sometimes was she able to feel truly free. And it was this sense of no fear. And that even for, like, you know, it's just a possibility that happens just ever so often in the right case scenario, surrounded by the right people with the right amount of liquor in your veins, and then you all of a sudden, I mean, this is me imagining what Nina Simone must have felt, but what an extraordinary feeling to feel no fear for even just a second. And I think drag is so threatening to certain people right now because it offers a vision of freedom, of absolute freedom. No? Oh, no. Yes. And it's extremely threatening. And I'm fascinated by drag, but drag in all of its forms. I feel we constantly drag in our everyday life. And I when I have a shoot, I long for that person. I long for that person, and I know it's a lot to contain in my relationship with them, for that person to feel free of whatever conditions they are leaving behind the door of my studio. And for that minute, you know, whoever, an indigenous leader who's super confused because traveled all the way from the Amazon and is in New York and doesn't know, but in that moment, in my studio, I want that person to feel that it's possible, you know, to achieve whatever that person is dreaming to have. And I know it's a lot to ask from that person, so I have strategies. I have some tricks. I take care a lot of the space. I have a little space that I'm nurturing. It's called Delicia Studio in Brooklyn. I always make sure to have music because music is a vehicle for so much. I have food. I invite friends of mine, like when we had the indigenous leaders of the Amazon come to the studio, I made a Chilean friend, come and bring tamales. And they, you know, he was cooking there, and they were like, "Oh, it's the first real food we've eaten all week." and we dance, and I have hair and makeup because, you know, fashion has given us all these tools to understand that, you know, everyone needs to feel elevated and beautiful and with great hair and makeup. And so we have hair and makeup, and then I just start making that person feel like they deserve. And then we take the photo, and the moment I show that person the photo, for me, the experience could end there. I don't need to have that photo published. I don't need to, just because that person looking at themselves is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And I wish, you know, I could just make that person feel that way forever. But again, I can't. And I'm only responsible for when people walk into the space. And now I'm trying to do the same with people in the street. I'm doing a big project in Colombian, so we've tried to simulate that also in the street. And it's about just feeling seen and feeling celebrated, and just try to make that person feel that, you know, their conditions for a second don't exist, and that they are at the cover of something. Because that is ultimately also the power of fashion, is that for some reason, a lot of people care about it. Surprisingly, you know, my grandma's friends from Colombia that never have spoken to me will call my mom and be like, "Oh, I saw Camila's photo," and you know, they'll care. Or like someone and so we cannot underrate that power of fashion. And you and I have tried to put everyone we can in the covers of Vogue, and
We've done a good
we
job
actually
so far.
had,
We actually
yeah.
done good. Yeah.
We were on it. Because it has a power, and I want to utilize that power. And I think we both are really aware that it's a huge platform that used with the help of the trickster
Yeah.
can open so many doors for things and can break the crack open.
Yeah. I'm so glad I asked you that question, and I got to hear that you are that is the perfect articulation of your work. You did such a brilliant job sharing it. I mean, and your work
It's called Delicia Studio Therapy.
Truly. I mean, that is your work. Your work is take seriously this thing which the industry wants to be disposable. Take seriously, I think the reason fashion, which is no different than any other industry, which is no more racist, no more exploitative, no more bullshit than anything else. In fact, fuck fossil fuels first, you know what I mean? But it is taking it, that what you're saying, that magnetism of it, that whatever critique, at the end of the day, you do feel a certain way when you wear a certain thing.
I mean, who doesn't like wearing like, ooh, you know, a good old couture, you know, we love it. Yes. Sorry,
And to speak on drag,
I'm going to say
too.
something I forgot.
And drag, the power of it is that you cannot fake it. It is a requirement that it's embodied. You know, and when we see all the people who have been empowered by this system that celebrates death, you can tell that they are not embodied. You can tell by their fashion. You can tell by how they are carrying themselves, how they express their self. You can tell they're not in their bodies.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think the you know, I'm obsessed with craft as one way to reclaim fashion from industry. And the reason that I'm obsessed with it is because you actually cannot fake it. Like, I was like quilting all throughout the pandemic and seeing people on TikTok be like, I found this quilt at the Goodwill, and then I turned it into this incredible jacket, and I'm watching this, there's an explosion of like Gen Z, they're like filling up knitting festivals, right? They're like learning how to mend everything. It's brilliant. And I was at Walmart, because I was in a rural area, I didn't have another choice. And I walked in, and they had tried to make the quilt jacket for $15 by printing it flat on polyester. You can't make it. And when you actually make the thing, you exit capitalism, because the number of hours it takes, there's no wage, it doesn't work like that. And what you are saying is, this labor that came from before, I am honoring that. And I am now part of that, and I'm exiting, because the amount of time, I'm in a different time scale right now, doing this slowly. That embodiment of craft, which is true of drag, which is true of ballroom, which is true of, even in many ways, I think the performance we have right now of femininity. It is so embodied that you cannot dissociate from the world that we are in, that is calling for us to listen. And that is fashion as culture, as a site that goes way beyond resistance, as a site of liberation, when we can take the two apart.
100%, yes.
And your work does that beautifully.
Aww. Yes. In regards to fashion, I think, and imagination, I think we can't disassociate it from the fact that fashion has been essentially what has kept hostage our aspirations, our collective aspirationality. It actually fits, like, I would include advertising as well, but then they've like created a series of emotional tactics for us to aspire to own, live, wear certain things. And I think that aspirationality is what needs to kind of be redirected. But at the same time, I think it's also good to to admit that one learns as, one goes. And I think I used to be I feel like when people ask me, oh, what do you do with your work? I used to say that I put in the pedestal humans that, have power and beauty and reclaim that power and beauty. And I used to use this word power. And I think I wasn't realizing that, power is really what the white man is obsessed with. And that I don't want to kind of recreate ideas of power. I think now we kind of need to not give to this industry what we aspire to. Because what they do is they absorb it, and it's like what we were talking about yesterday as well, about excellence. That is just repeating and repeating modes of hierarchy. And so now I think I'm also learning that it's really not about reclaiming power. I think I want to talk more about reclaiming potential, reclaiming humanity and dignity, and just the capacity to exist as a human being in the world, and that we don't need to be excellent. We don't need to be,
But I would say that in your work, what I see is that you see excellence and beauty everywhere. And in a sense, you say that it is so commonplace. But it is not to say, okay, person in front of me, you are not skilled, you are not strong, you are not beautiful, you're not powerful. You're all of those things, but in those things you are unexceptional.
You see, and you are one within all of us. Mm-hmm. I think, yes, obviously I see the beauty, and I just think we don't need to keep putting the person on the pedestal, because that's isolating the person from a context we are constantly navigating and invisibilizing the existence of so many people.
That's why we've been strategizing this shoot with 200 people.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Oh my God. We'll talk about that in public, so you know. But I think the pedestal might be something to reconsider. And I'm saying that if you look at
sitting on a pedestal.
No, as someone who's been photographing humans on pedestals over and over again, I think that pedestal isolates, and it's easier to isolate. And it's easier to negate the existence, deny, bring down, if you see just one person in the pedestal. If you see hundreds of thousands of people walking in the ground, that is harder to erase. That is harder to shut down. Cameron and I have a relationship that is very funny. Cameron and I have been collaborating for a long, and it's always Cameron calling me on the phone and telling me, Camila, I have an idea. We're gonna do...
It's super simple, it's just 500 people, it's on Thursday.
It's gonna be the biggest... And I'm always like, okay, yes.
It's a good working relationship.
Going well so far. Hope it lasts for a long time.
Me too. Yeah. Should we open it to questions? I don't know a time frame. Yeah?
Oh.
Well, it relates empowered versus power, because I was going to ask that you both are so committed to empowering other people and communities, or maybe if we take the word power out of that, you're both so generous with yourselves and your work and your life for people to uplift. How did you arrive at embodying that in your work? And I would love to hear from both of you on that.
You go.
Well, there's like a great hot take that you can just Instagram on the word empowerment, so I'm not going to go there. But I will say that I think it's really hard not to replicate a power structure of domination if in any moment you felt, particularly as a young person, dominated, because then you feel like you begin to understand, I think incorrectly, that that is how the world works. And so in order to be, I think that you begin to believe in order to survive, to be free, to affect change, you have to dominate. And there's lots of ways that this looks. I think it looks like, replicated in our movements with like influencers. There's all different ways that domination can look. Some obviously violent and harmful, and some much more harmless and I think just human nature. So for me, as a kid, I wanted to be president, like very genuinely. So one of those really annoying kids who was like, no, for sure.
Please, please.
And I think there's something really juvenile about that, because it's understanding the world in that like Marvel like nonsense. It's like as if one person on top is gonna fix it. And I'm not surprised that I understood the world that way, because that's how our public schools teach kids history. To relate it to learning a history of organizing in fashion, when I got old enough to be like, how come we're celebrating FDR? Like, isn't he in charge of internment camps? And people be like, yeah, but the New Deal. And you'd be like, wait, what? And then you kind of learn okay. And then people be like, oh, well, he's like a product of his time, But you know who else is a product of his time is Frances Perkins, right? Who did help architect the New Deal because she was educated by garment workers and organizers. Or Pauli Murray, who was the pen pal of Eleanor Roosevelt. And Pauli Murray is a gender nonconforming lawyer whose student papers at Howard inform the victory of Brown v. Board of Education. And they were a product of their time, just as much. So I think that replication, that aspiration, thinking, I don't blame myself or blame lots of other people. I think that, this is recorded, but I am going to say it anyway. Then you can redact it later. We're in a moment of extremely painful reckoning with what happens when a population is traumatized, right? When a population is genocided, what happens? And what types of, what comes from that when it is unresolved? And so I think that when we experience harm, it's very hard to not end up thinking my survival depends on being able to dominate someone else, because that experience is a very profound teacher. So I think trying to undo that in myself as much as I can. And of course, often unsuccessfully. Yeah.
Something we haven't touched upon in our conversation about fashion is how, like any other industry, again, is male-dominated. And so when I was starting my career and figuring out what am I doing, what I want to be a photographer, and really knowing that I wanted to express myself through photography, but it just kept finding myself being pushed into, if you want to be successful in this career, you're going to need to follow these steps. Those steps being those that have made men in photography and in fashion successful. And so I remember feeling like those steps, the reward of them was como ego boost, name something more masculine than that, and then como money, which, okay, pero that's not the end goal of anything. And I started realizing that, oh, this is what men want in life. You know, como just like, oh, I'm shoot these things, and I have access to spaces of exclusivity. And I remember realizing that that's not why I'm taking photos at all. And so I had to kind of, you know, because patriarchy lives in all of us in different forms. And I think in me, and in growing up in Spain with a Latin American family, more involuntarily, I think from my family, like you are patriarchal in so many ways as well. So I think working towards understanding that that is not my goal through my own work in my identity as a person, then you realize, like, okay, why am I taking photographs if it's not to feel like I'm the shit and, you know, make money to buy whatever. I don't even know what to buy when I have money. So, and so I started kind of like working towards, okay, what else? And then you realize that you're here in service. I'm in service. That's what I've come to conclude so far. Maybe next edition, I'll be like, I've discovered. So far, I'm understanding that I'm in service of something bigger than myself. And that's why I do what I do. And I'm just here purely to open that door. And when I understood that, almost like you just like kind of like dissolve into the tissues of the world. You're not this independent entity in a pedestal where everyone wants to put you. You are kind of like part of a wave. And so it feels just so much better. And then you have all of these men in the every time tinier space in their exclusive spaces. And so I've created all of these structures around me to have work that has abundance through pairing with an incredible agent, with an incredible gallerist, with collaborators like Atmos, and then you realize that the way is full because it's in this network, and it's so much better, so much better. Yeah.
Are we done? Okay, we're done. Okay.
No.
No?
One more?
Okay,
One
sorry,
more question?
I couldn't read from all the way.
Anyone else? Yes.
I think in your conversation you talked about different interruptions in your work, the patriarchy, the industry, not catching up to where you need to go, and the ways you've kind of mitigated and adapted to it. Like if you were to remove the interruption to the work of building community and having individuals come face to face with themselves, like how would your work be shifted in terms of photography or fashion?
I will say that every interruption is such a gift. I am grateful for every time I didn't know what to do. That's a good moment. It's horrible, but it's a good moment, and I don't think my work is meant to be anything else than what it comes from all of those lessons. I think it's a really beautiful moment for us to, what we were been talking all weekend, I think, is to bloom from all of these interruptions. It's our duty to bloom for this, and kind of like also was talking to Cameron last night about letting go of a certain naivete. Is that a word? Did I say it right?
Naivete,
okay.
yeah.
Naivete of and still finding hope without being naive. That's a big challenge, and I'm in it, and I love it. Because, yes, the world is fucked, and it's sad, and it's a moment to still regard, like the conversation on the ocean and that last part of the hope, you realize, like, because we need to still feel hope, and that's our gift. So yeah.
I don't know how to answer that, so I'm going to answer what I think it is. I think I have wondered a lot of times, like, when I graduated from high school and then I went to college, or when I graduated from college and I was like, oh man, now it's time to get a real job. Or, just various moments where I was like, am I supposed to be continuing to do this? Like, I kind of feel like I just fell into it. I was 16, I don't know. And the older that I get and the more I have friends who are on just wildly different paths. Like my sister who is an ER doctor, or my close friend who's a lawyer or a nurse, or, whichever field that they're in. It actually feels like all of us are just really, in many ways, up against some of the same things. And slightly different sort of tools, different ways forward, but even almost the same tools in some ways, like no matter which place, like we're seeing organizing bloom everywhere. It doesn't matter if you work for Condé Nast, right? Everybody is organizing. That is what we have to do. That feeling of complicity that I thought was so unique to fashion, I think almost all of my friends feel that in their job in some way or another. And it was interesting to release this book in this moment where I think a lot of people had that same dissonance that I was feeling, maybe at their job, or maybe at the dinner table, or maybe at the polls, or there was something about what's happening in my heart and my mind, what's happening when I lie down in my bed in the middle of the night, feels very different from the person I'm expected to be when I show up at my job at 9 a.m. It feels like we have very different, what I know is important at midnight is not what my boss tells me is important at 9 a.m. But what I know that is important at midnight is survival, it's something that, and so that dissonance I think is being felt everywhere. And what was happening in fashion is that fashion which speaks the language of beauty and grace and agreeability was like an invitation for me to question that performance and also what can be done from within that performance. A little zoom out, 20 conglomerates own 97% of fashion industry profits. So when we talk about, can you change this from within? There's almost no within and without. If you own 97% of profits, because of the way that we've organized the world and what we need to survive, most people are going to be inside. Most people with a proclivity, with a sensibility, with an interest, or with just the luck to be in this industry who now, because of however they landed here, understand what is wrong, what is right. They're going to be inside. They're going to be playing an inside game. And so, the call to figure out what do we do in response to this moment, I think the question for me was, what can I reach? Who is sitting next to me? What do I understand? And because I had done this job by luck, that was who I was sitting next to. And then because I had done this job and I started to see all the ways in which it was interesting. It was beautiful. It was provocative. It was terrible. I could see that really clearly. And so this thing that I thought was an interruption in my life, or can't wait to get out of here, I think is also just where I am called to be critical and be imaginative, because who else? Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.